Israel's war in Gaza has been treacherous political terrain for the Labour Party. They aren't in government, so they can't do very much. At least that's what they like to say. But they likely soon will be. What is more, Labour are meant to be the more progressive of Britain's two major parties. And those who particularly care about events in Gaza, from anti-war activists to British Muslims, are more likely to vote for them. Now, you might not have heard of Pat McFadden, but he is an influential figure within Keir Starmer's circle. Alongside the party leader Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner, McFadden is generally viewed as certain to be a top figure in any Labour government. So what he says matters, and we should pay close attention. This morning he appeared on Sky News, where Kay Burley put this question to him.
Is Labour comfortable selling arms to Israel?
Look, we always want Israel or any ally to abide by international humanitarian law. We've said that all the way through this conflict. And, that's what guides our policy.
So is that a yes or a no? I'm not sure.
Well, we don't have a boycott of selling arms to Israel.
Even given what's happening in Gaza at the moment?
Look, there are three things which have guided our policy since this phase of this began 6 months ago. One is the return of the hostages, some of whom are still being held.
Yeah.
The second is a sustainable stop to this conflict, not just a pause where it starts up again in a few months.
But you're not answering my question.
What is your question?
My question is Labour comfortable selling arms to Israel at the moment? Would you be?
If we are selling arms to allies who are abided by international humanitarian law, then that's something that
So you do think that Israel's abiding by international law?
Well, if there's proper legal evidence that they aren't, the government should come out and say so. We've said this all the way through.
We always want Israel or any ally to abide by international humanitarian law. Okay, sounds good. But if they aren't, then what do? Do you allow them to keep buying weapons from the UK? If it can be established that Israel has broken international law, what would Labour do about it rather than say, oh, we really wish you wouldn't? McFadden even smirks when Burley put that question to him a second time. So either he isn't taking this very seriously or he doesn't think it's particularly important. We're only talking about the collective punishment of civilians. We're only talking about 13,000 kids dying, or on that day, us finding out that 3 UK nationals were killed. But can you imagine McFadden's attitude if this was Russia or Iran, if they'd killed all those kids and bombed an embassy and killed the aid workers? I can't. I think he'd be a hell of a lot more angry. He might even be upset. Now, perhaps McFadden's relaxed attitude here can be explained by the fact he's a member of Labour Friends of Israel, LFI. Indeed, he's not just a member, he's a parliamentary officer for the organisation. This is an extraordinary number. Labour Friends of Israel counts 73 Labour MPs as parliamentary supporters. So almost half of the Labour Party are, quote, friends of Israel. I personally think every single one of them should be asked if they're friends of the country that just killed 3 of their compatriots, including Pat McFadden. And by the way, Keir Starmer is amongst those 73 Labour Friends of Israel. Mike, what did you make of McFadden's response? It struck me as incredibly blasé given the broader context.
Yeah, it was incredibly blasé, and I think Labour's response throughout the last 6 months has been nothing short of wholly disgusting, really. I think let's cast our minds back to 2020 when Keir Starmer was running to be the leader of the Labour Party, and he spoke about how human rights would be central to its foreign policy approach under his leadership, right? So we fast forward to 2024, and the kind of greatest crime of our age, as I described this what's going on in Gaza earlier, Labour are committed to being on the wrong side of history. And history will remember where Labour were and what Labour was saying and doing during the greatest crime of our age. And what Labour have been doing essentially is justifying Israel's genocide, some kind of condemnation, but again, assuming Israel's acting in good faith, the kind of flawed liberal consensus I always speak about on Novara. And I think that contribution we just seen there, or with Kay Burley, is another reminder of this. Labour aren't willing to, deliver some home truths on what Israel's doing, and deliver the idea that Israel is violating international laws, international norms, and this kind of tepid criticism of it's bad that people are dying, but we will still support Israel, and it's delivered in this really monosyllabic tone, and it's frustrating to me. It's deeply frustrating to me. People seem to think this is all about winning the election, right? So the idea that, okay, Labour might lose a couple of voters over this, but it's all right. They're going to win the election anyway, so that's fine. No, that's not how it works, right? Because Labour's stance on this should be used as a heuristic for its stance on other issues linked to human rights. How can we trust the Labour Party to defend human rights in Britain when it's not criticising a state which has killed British citizens, when it has Labour members, parliamentary members, part of a group that's Labour Friends of Israel, when Israel are committing acts of genocide which are affecting British citizens, for example? How can we trust them to defend human rights, given their stance on this entire issue? So I think, in many ways, yes, Labour might win the election, partly because Conservatives are an absolute mess. Fantastic, wonderful stuff, amazing, all of that stuff, right? But we can't ignore its stance on this big issue. We simply cannot. And I think its stance on this issue is fundamental in potentially guiding the direction of a Labour government on other issues linked to human rights. How can we trust them on these other issues? I think so. So that's where I am with this. And I think some people want us to just kind of forget this stance because, hey, look, we need the big boys back in governments, the sensible adults back in governments to guide and rescue Britain and steer the ship in the right direction. I'm increasingly worried about what a Labour government has to offer for us, like increasingly worried to the point where, I'm genuinely anxious about this, right? So I think we need to be really, really stern about Labour and its lack of critique on Israel, because it is a deep worry for what might lie ahead for us. The problem I've had throughout this crisis is the gaslighting. So if you remember, there's an LBC appearance by Keir Starmer. I think he often goes on there with Novara, right? And he spoke about how Israel has the right to cut off electricity and water, right? And then a couple of months later, it was like, no, I didn't say that, when we literally saw the footage. So what's going to happen is, at some point, Labour are going to be forced into a slightly more principled position than they're currently occupying, right? It'll probably happen because the US have taken the lead, and, Starmer now thinks, oh, okay, well, Biden said this, I can kind of maybe shift slightly to a more progressive position on this because the US have done so as well. And then they're going to pretend that was always their position. Oh, no, we always fought this. Come on. We always defended this. No, you didn't. The tapes are there. The footage is there. The tweets are there. We will remember this. And I think it's important that voters keep this in the back of their mind when it comes to future Labour governments.
I was thinking, watching that clip of McFadden, the equivalent, I think, for his job under Corbyn was Rebecca Long-Bailey, I think. Can you imagine the media response if, when she was asked that question, on the day we find out 3 UK nationals were killed, if she'd smirked like that? Can you imagine? I mean, she would have been out of the job within 3 hours. We would have had the LBC call-ins. God knows. They would have, it would have been like the bat signal for Panorama and John Ware and Newsnight. It would have been like, right, get her. But of course, you can just, be so blasé about something which is going to impact all of us and nobody cares, because of course it's the Labour right. Also, and I think this goes back to what you were saying a moment ago, Mike, there is a very strong possibility that Israel wants to escalate what's going on right now. They need to maintain, as my colleague Michael Walker has pointed out many, many times, very astute observation, they need to keep the United States in that part of the world. It's in their interest. The United States wants to pivot towards Asia because it recognizes rightly that, the main rival in the 21st century is China. It doesn't really care about the Middle East. But Israel wants to keep them there. And it increasingly seems like the best way to do that is to create a regional war of some kind with Iran. That's what they want to do. It doesn't need to be a hot war, but some kind of low-level, permanent war with Iran. Primarily through proxies, but maybe not. Maybe you see some bombing of various sites in Iran. I don't think a ground invasion wouldn't be plausible, but, something like that to keep the United States entrenched in that part of the world. And my worry is, as somebody who's in the UK, we have 73 Labour MPs who are quote-unquote friends of Israel. 73! So if Israel wants that war, do they just nod their heads and go, yes? Because, by the way, to those 73 MPs, you're meant to be representing your constituents here in Britain. Crazy idea, I know. you're meant to be thinking first and foremost about those three people, those three UK nationals, the kinds of people you're paid to represent. They're meant to matter more than the little lobbyists that you have brunch with in London. I know, again, that's a radical idea. Maybe it's even old-fashioned, but that's meant to be how a democracy works. And like I say, if there is some kind of regional escalation, those 73 members, and it'll be more because there'll be more Labour MPs after the next general election, those Labour friends of Israel, what are the conditions that have to be met for them not to be friends of Israel? Will they allow themselves to be drawn into another reckless, stupid, idiotic, counterproductive war in West Asia? Because let's remember, Labour has form on that. They did it 20 years ago. Not a single drop of blood of a UK national should be shed for what's going on. And if that's the future of this Project Labour Friends of Israel, I think really there should be no place for them in politics. You're paid. Your job is to look after people in this country, not to be part of a promotional effort to start a war thousands of miles away. Now, Keir Starmer's position on Israel's ruthless assault on Gaza continues to create problems within the Labour Party. 20 Labour councillors in Lancashire have now quit Labour in protest at the party's leadership. Those 20 councillors represented Labour on 3 local councils. That includes all 10 of the Labour members of Pendle Borough Council who've quit the party, along with its leader. The other 10 Labour councillors sat on Briarfield Town Council and Nelson Town Council. All of them will now form an independent group. Pendle Borough Council leader Asjad Mahmood said this in a statement. I, along with my colleagues, was elected by local residents to represent them in the council chamber. As a Labour councillor, I've always felt the party's policies were aligned with my own beliefs, and those of the constituents who have honoured me with their votes. Sadly, over a recent period, senior party officials have attempted to impose their ideas at a local level. I was elected to serve the public, not party officials. We could have a few more Labour MPs say that. I was elected to serve the public, not Labour Friends of Israel. The Lancashire defection is the largest since Starmer became Labour leader, and it follows the resignation of 11 councillors in Burnley in November. They quit over Starmer's decision not to press for a ceasefire in Gaza, and in total, over 70 Labour councillors have resigned in protest at his position. Starmer's reluctance to take a clear stance on Israel's war on Gaza also seems to have impacted the party's membership. Labour has now seen its membership fall by 23,000 in just 2 months. And that's because of its policies on Gaza and its U-turn on the environment. That's according to The Guardian. A National Executive Committee member, Luke Akehurst, said this about those figures. Party membership is still at historically high levels. Labour only had 150,000 members at the end of its last period in office in 2010. The state of the opinion polls suggest there is no correlation between membership and electoral popularity. Can you imagine a more dismissive message to members? We don't care what you think or what you do. We just want your money. You are totally irrelevant. And by the way, ahead of the 1997 landslide, Labour's party membership went from 250,000 to over 400,000 people. People were enthusiastic about a change of government. They joined the Labour Party. At one point, Tony Blair was talking about 1 million members. Meanwhile, in 2024, they've not even won, and people are already walking away. So yes, this matters. Anyway, it looks like Labour wasn't very happy with The Guardian running that story. So, 2 days later, this story fortuitously appeared in the same newspaper. 4 in 5 Labour members back Keir Starmer, according to polling. Wow, okay, that's pretty impressive. But look at the fine print. If you look a little closer, that polling is from April 2023 and last October. April 2023 and last October. So half of it is a year out of date, and the other half is from before Starmer's position on Gaza started to have an impact. That is, almost without question, a political cleanup from The Guardian after the Labour leadership threw a wobbly. How dare you publish this? We want you to do us a favour. Here's a great story. Here's a piece of news from 6 months ago. Nobody thinks something that happens in October is news, except it seems The Guardian. But there's no denying that the Labour leadership is popular with a decent proportion of Labour voters. After all, their polling is pretty good. And part of his success lies in his commitment to never offending anyone, unless, of course, they're left wing. But that means he's incapable of showing real leadership when it's needed. Even on a day when 3 British citizens delivering humanitarian aid in Gaza were blown up by Israel in what looks like a targeted strike. Even then, we get an identikit statement from somebody who wants to be our future Prime Minister. Reports of the death of British nationals, among others from World Central Kitchen, in an Israeli strike on Gaza are horrifying. Our thoughts are with the families of all those killed. We condemn this strike. There must be a full investigation, and those responsible must be held to account. Humanitarian workers put their lives in danger to serve others. Their deaths are outrageous and unacceptable, and it's not the first time aid workers have come under fire in Israel's campaign. International law must be upheld, and humanitarian workers must be protected so they can deliver the aid that is desperately needed. This war must stop now. Far too many innocent people have died in this conflict, and more than 1 million are facing starvation. Labour repeats our call for an immediate ceasefire, the immediate release of all hostages, and full humanitarian access into Gaza. Those responsible must be held to account. Mr. Starmer, the people responsible work for a country who you are a friend of, Israel. But thanks for the thoughts and prayers. Maybe you can get a trending hashtag. Who knows?